Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Amy Myers, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to this webinar for supporting teaching and learning with the Tools for Teachers website, brought to you by the California Department of Education. This webinar is the first in a series of Tools for Teachers shared practices webinars that will be occurring throughout this school year. We'll share a little more info about the upcoming webinars at the end of today's presentation. Before we hand it off to our very knowledgeable presenters, we want to address a few housekeeping items. First, all participants are muted and the chat is turned off today. We will be collecting questions through the Q&A feature in Zoom. Please submit any questions that you might have there, and the presenters will do their best to answer those during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. A link to the folder that has a copy of today's slides and a resources page that includes all of the links that our presenters are going to be talking about today are available on our upcoming training opportunities webpage on CAASPP and ELPAC.org. And I will place the link to that in the chat right now. There it is. We will be recording today's presentation, and the archive of that presentation will be available for download on the CAASPP and ELPAC YouTube page and CAASPP.org and ELPAC.org training opportunities web pages. That will be available in 1 or 2 weeks after the meeting. So with that, we would like to pass it over to our presenters for today. So please give a warm welcome to our presenters.
Thank you, Amy. Welcome, everyone. My name is Tammy Saldana. I am an education programs consultant with the California Department of Education. I'm excited to be here with you today to hear from California educators how they are using the resources available in the Tools for Teachers website. Today, I have with me 3 presenters. There is Beth Snade. She is an assessment and data coordinator from Compass Charter Schools. And with her is Brenda Lasley. She is an assessment TOSA, which means teacher on special assignment. And she is a curriculum developer, also from Compass Charter Schools. And there is Michael T. Smith, an English teacher from William S. Hart Union High School District. He is also a member of the State Network of Educators. The State Network of Educators are groups of educators from across the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium who are trained to contribute and review instructional and professional learning resources for inclusion in the Smarter Tools for Teachers website. I will go over the agenda for today. Beth will share a quick Tools for Teachers introduction. Then she will share how their schools are using professional learning resources from Tools for Teachers. And then Brenda will share a resource that they have made that supports teachers in finding instructional resources aligned with standards. And then we will have Michael share how he is supplementing classroom instruction with Tools for Teachers resources. Then we will wrap up this 1-hour webinar with a Q&A session. So be sure to submit your questions through the Zoom Q&A. Don't forget, there is a link in the chat for accessing today's presentation slides and the resource guide, which has all the links to the resources that our presenters are going to talk about today. So without further delay, I will turn over the presentation to Beth. Thank you for being here today, Beth.
Thank you so much, Tammy. As Tammy introduced me, I am the Assessment and Data Coordinator for Compass Charter Schools. Compass is a virtual charter school, which means we don't have school sites, and we serve scholars in 18 counties through 3 charters. I'm also part of the staff support team at Compass, which includes instructional coaches and TOSAs. One of our focuses is on staff professional learning, including assisting with onboarding of new teachers. I am so excited to be here today to share with you how we use Tools for Teachers. Before I share that about the professional learning resources, let me share with you a little introduction about the website Tools for Teachers. If you don't know, Tools for Teachers is an educated created library of instructional resources, accessibility strategies formative assessment strategies, and professional learning resources to guide you in your instruction, and it is the formative assessment component of the Smarter Balanced Assessment System. Some of our audience may have been around when this started as the digital library, and it's evolved so much since then. Every resource available in Tools for Teachers incorporates all the attributes of the formative assessment process. Resources are also aligned with Common Core state standards for mathematics and English language arts, and California has added instructional resources for science, which are aligned with the next generation science standards. I believe that Tools for Teachers resources can support any curriculum. So what's wonderful about Tools for Teachers is that it can be accessed from the CAASPP website using the quick link icons at the top of the homepage. As a reminder, all of the links to the websites and resources today are in the resource guide. Teachers can enter and self-register with an LEA or district-issued email, even if the district administrator hasn't uploaded examiners or administrators into TOMS yet. This is great for our instructional coaches to share with teachers they are mentoring, especially if those teachers aren't sure where to find lesson plans, or if they haven't been signed up to the subscriptions that we use. I personally like to host a training for our teachers in October to showcase the various resources available, including Tools for Teachers, Smarter Content Explorer, the Sample Items website, and the Annotated Response Tool. I can't start too early in the school year because the teachers are working through all of those beginning of the year processes, including our benchmark assessments. But I want to ensure that teachers have the knowledge to support them early on. My colleagues will be exploring the instructional resources with you later. But right now, I'd like to highlight using the Tools for Teachers professional learning resources that are available. Our teachers, like most teachers, are feeling overwhelmed. But even while experiencing that, they are hungry for knowledge. They want to know more, learn more, and they are excited to support students' learning. If you've ever created professional learning, it's quite the challenge. Well, Tools for Teachers has you covered. So I'm going to jump over to a live demonstration. Okay, so let's start at the CAASPP.org website. From this homepage, click on the Tools for Teachers icon in the quick links, which is the top row, right side. This links to the Tools for Teachers and other formative assessment resources page, which gives you resources such as training videos, flyers, information about Tools for Teachers and other Smarter Balanced tools, such as the Smarter Content Explorer and the others I mentioned earlier. From this page, click on the Tools for Teachers icon again at the top of the page, and you'll be redirected to the Tools for Teachers website. Okay, so I am logged in, but let me log out real quick. I'll show you. So when you want to log in, you'll use this left side gray navigation bar to select login at the bottom of the screen. And then you'll choose California from this drop-down list and select go. Then you'll be presented with the all familiar login page for the TOMS systems. You would enter your username and password. If you need to register for the first time, you would use the link register under the Register for Tools for Teachers and enter your district issued or school issued email, and you should be able to gain access immediately. Once logged in, you'll use that left side gray navigation pane again, and that pops out when you hover over it. And select Professional Learning from the menu. It's a little more than halfway down the list, and it's next to an icon with a silhouette of a person reaching for a star. This links to the Professional Learning Resources landing page, which provides information you may need to access and use the professional learning resources. There's a video about Tools for Teachers and even sample resources linked on the right side toward the bottom of the page. If you have a topic, you can use the blue box search field, or you can use the link below the search field to browse all professional learning resources. I'm going to click that now. Once the search is entered, you'll see the list of resources. So my search of all resources has returned 56 professional learning resources. I could further filter these resources by adding keywords into the search field at the top. you scroll through, we'll see there's several resources for the interim assessments, which can assist your teachers in understanding the interim assessment performance tasks or the interim assessment blocks, for example. There's even professional resources on understanding tools for teachers. So as I scrolled through, this resource caught my eye since it's newer. Starting at the 6th resource listed, I see 4 modules that I might be interested for my teachers and staff, titled Effective School-Home Partnerships. Other professional resources that I have found that are useful are the Individual Student Assessment Accessibility Profile, or ISAP tool, and the Remote Learning and the Formative Assessment Process. So if we click on this new resource, we can review it by clicking on the title. So this is going to show us an overview, description, learning goals, success criteria, step-by-step plans with lesson preparation, intended learning, background knowledge, and any other resources that are necessary, including a call to action and the post-training follow-up and the attachments of everything that you might need to present this. So how I might use this is take this resource and create an interactive Nearpod lesson for my staff. Nearpod, which is similar to Pear Deck, can be used to create interactive teacher-led or student-paced lessons. Our teachers are busy, and setting time aside for a full team or a full staff meeting for specific training or professional learning is difficult. We've been creating self-paced training in Nearpod for our teachers, which allows us to break it up with checks for understanding and short quizzes. We assign those lessons as pre-work, so when we do have a meeting or training, we can concentrate on the demonstration or take questions from the teachers to clarify our focus. This flipped learning style has been very helpful to front load our teachers and staff with information and allow our live meeting time together to be focused on protocols and applying their learning to the classroom. If you like a particular resource, you can bookmark it by clicking on the icon that looks like a ribbon or bookmark. If you want to find those bookmarked items the next time you log in, use that left sidebar menu and click on bookmarks and notes right there near the bottom. You can share the resource by clicking on the share arrow icon. This will present you with a link that you can copy and send to a colleague or save for yourself in your planning notes. You can also add notes by clicking on the paper pencil icon, or you can print the resource by clicking on the print icon. Remember, printing that resource doesn't print the attachments, so be aware that you'll have to download and print those separately. On the right side, you can see related resources. So this specific resource is module 1 of 4, and this is a nice way to navigate to the next connected modules. This is very similar to the playlists in the instructional resources. Many of the professional learning topics can help your teachers begin to explore topics like the interim assessment blocks, the smarter balanced ecosystem, and even social emotional learning. This is just a small part of what's available on Tools for Teachers, and it's a great resource for me to be able to support our teachers. So there's another way that we support our teachers that we would like to share with you today. My colleague, Brenda Lasley, created a way for teachers to quickly find standards-aligned instructional resources. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to Brenda now, and she can explain more about what she has created and how she located the lessons on Tools for Teachers.
Thank you so much, Beth. As was shared earlier, my name is Brenda Lasley, and I am an assessment TOSA and curriculum developer at Compass Charter Schools. I'm happy to be invited here today to share with you how we're using standards-aligned Tools for Teachers instructional resources at Compass Charter Schools. The instructional resources in Tools for Teachers are an absolutely incredible resource for teachers. However, getting our teachers to log in was the first hurdle. Beth just beautifully explained how to help teachers get started by creating their registration, etc. We're going to build on that. In order to have access to the full resources that we'll be sharing, teachers will want to log in to Tools for Teachers prior to clicking on any of the resources that we share in our document. We've created our own resources for our Tools for Teachers using Tools for Teachers instructional resources to help our teachers use the formative assessment process during the instruction of ELA, English Language Arts, and math. We searched in 3rd to 8th grade for full lessons and 11th grade for specific sample items in the resource guide provided. And we also have a link to a copy of the resource we made in our resources guide. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and show you what we created. So again, I've already logged into Tools for Teachers following Best Wonderful Instructions. And as you can see down here at the bottom, we have all of our tabs listing out the different grade levels all the way through 11th grade. In this first tab, we have instructions that are specific to our organization, and we linked our calendar, which has our grading periods or learning periods. So our teachers move through specific standards each LP, which is a learning period or a grading period. We've added standards at a glance for each of these grading periods. Our intention was to have instruction drive the resources chosen, and we wanted teachers to interact with the incredible resources that we have offered them here in this document. So we linked full lessons, instructed that these lessons could be broken down and used in parts according to their needs. We also pointed out that the instructional differentiation and support needed, accessibility strategies, formative assessment strategies, etc., are all embedded within these wonderful lessons. All that's needed from teachers is to become familiar with the material and formulate how they'll present the lessons to their students. So we're going to go ahead and click on a lesson. So I actually have it open already. The one that I chose was for our LP1 or grading period 1, and I chose lesson 2 from math, which is right here. And as you can see, everything, just like Beth was showing with the professional development lesson that she was just demonstrating, everything that a teacher would need is right at their fingertips. So the learning goals, what is going to show that the student has successfully learned the material, and then the progression through the lesson itself, including the formative assessment strategies that are all linked and described. So one thing I really love that Tools for Teachers has done is they've linked these formative assessment strategies and explained them. So if it gets clicked on, a little bubble pops up and it does a brief explanation. If you click on keep reading, it will actually give you a very complete and full explanation for how to carry that assessment strategy out. As you scroll down, you get the quick checks. You have a section for how to go about engaging and interacting with the material. Again, all of those strategies are also linked within that section. And then when you scroll past that, all of the materials that you'll need to be able to carry out this lesson are linked right at the bottom of the lesson itself. So if you need a PowerPoint to present, any of the worksheets, any of the handouts, it's all going to be right here. Then the accessibility strategies that are embedded will be listed and shown. And also a section for things to consider where you can do extension activities with your students. So it's a wonderful resource for the teachers. Now on the Tools for Teachers landing page, which we're going to click back to, there's a link to the sample items website. So we clicked on the left-hand corner where it says Tools for Teachers. That takes us to the landing page in Tools for Teachers. And then we're going to go ahead and scroll all the way down and click on sample items. And I mentioned that we have sample items linked for each grade level as well as for the 11th grade level in our resource. Well, we are actually showing you where to find those sample items and where they're linked. So if you open the sample items area up once you've logged in, and you click on any of these sample items listed in this resource, it'll take you straight to that sample item. Whoops, this one did not. Let's see, we have one to fix. We'll head back here and we will click on this one. And the neat thing about the sample items is you can click on about this item. It will tell you the claim, the target description, and the content standard that's covered in that sample item. So that is it for our tools document, our tools resource, and all of the instructional items that we've linked here. We hope you enjoy it and it's useful for you. And I'm going to turn it back to Amy.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. I'll jump in here because I'm next, and I'm going to actually give you an opportunity to kind of see how I've used resources myself in the classroom. My name is Michael Smith, and thank you, Brenda and Beth, for giving us kind of an overview and some instruction for how to access tools for teachers. Yes, as I've already been introduced, I'm an English teacher with the William S. Hart Union High School District. I've also had the opportunity to be part of the California State Network of Educators team, and I've contributed development to some of the resources available in tools for teachers. And as I just mentioned, today I wanted to kind of show you how I use tools for teacher lesson plans to supplement classroom instruction. So classroom instruction here, if you look at the Tools for Teachers website, it offers instructional resources to help teachers supplement instruction aligned with standards. In fact, Tools for Teachers provides access to a great variety of instructional resources that's allowed me to, well, number one, review key standards with students. It's allowed me an opportunity to reteach essential skills in which students struggle learning. And then lastly, to reinforce best practices for both myself and students. And over the next few minutes, I wanted to show you how I use tools for teachers to accomplish these purposes in classroom instruction. Sometimes students just need a quick review of certain skills or standards. So, the first thing you have to do, of course, is think about, what skills need to be reviewed. Perhaps you've determined a review is needed based on a diagnostic or interim assessment, or maybe you've noticed a need or a gap in a prerequisite skill or some other skill you've already taught. For me, early in the year, sophomore English, before we kind of get into our essential questions and core texts, I already know that I want students to focus on what I call layers of critical reading. And one of those crucial layers is the development of theme. Now, while students will have a general sense of theme as a lesson or moral, and in particular, I want students to really review the notion that theme expresses an insight into life, rather than just a topic. More importantly, I want students to understand that reading critically is similar to a detective looking for clues. We must read a text with a critical eye as to how an author is developing ideas throughout the text. So, I've determined that I want to search for a lesson about theme, and so I will go to Tools for Teachers. To carry out the search for tools or for the theme and tools for teachers, I'll use the keywords found in the standard content using the filters that are available. I can also search using the keyword search bar, or you'll see a filter link to choose your grade and subject. So when I carried out a search for analyzing for theme in Tools for Teachers, and I scrolled through the results, I discovered a great instructional resource called Analyzing Theme. This resource not only focuses on how themes are developed, but also the resource it provides a great opportunity to integrate reading and writing. For example, in the lesson plans, the lessons incorporate the use of Gift of the Magi, which is a short story by O. Henry, and then offers a writing strategy called REAL, R-E-A-L. It's an acronym that helps students write about theme. Now, I'd also like to note that Tools for Teachers generally draws from short texts accessible to readers. which is really important because it helps teachers find good texts that are appropriate for multiple levels of student learning. And they include suggested instructional strategies for formative assessment and accessibility. So I think one of the greatest aspects of the resources, however, is that it allows us to really focus on explicit skills or standards. In that case, we were talking about theme. Now, sometimes we need to reteach essential skills in which students need more experience or exposure. In this case, the Connections playlist provides a great opportunity to target those topics. In Tools for Teachers, there are playlists that have links to the lesson plans. Every Connections playlist has a list of topics assessed by an interim assessment block that can help you find topics to reteach or the ideas or lessons or standards through the linked lesson plans. So in my classroom, one of our essential standards focuses on the impact of author's diction on the tone and mood of a piece. So, we'll spend the first, when we go through our first unit, we look at tone and mood in a variety of texts. And in the unit in particular, we look at the allure of fear in Gothic literature and magic realism and in modern Gothic traditions. And then we'll have a kind of an assessment. We'll have an assessment of those the skills and competencies of the unit. As I looked at student scores, I noticed that, where do they need more assessment, help? Where do they need more sort of follow-up? And so I decided I'd use a follow-up lesson to reteach the impact of diction and on tone and mood to students that were struggling with the students. So as an example, I went ahead and I went to a Connections playlist in this case, I selected the Read Informational Text Interim Connections playlist for high school. Selecting the lesson aligned with the topic on language use, I found a great lesson to work on reteaching the habits of mind we need as readers try to examine the impact of language and tone on the mood of a text. This resource is great because, well, first, it uses a lot of great strategies: read aloud, think, pair, share, using highlighters, and there's some others. And the lesson provides a lot of great suggestions about differentiation for readers who already have a strong understanding of the impact of tone and mood on a text. So since I have students at various points of understanding, the differentiation strategies are particularly and were particularly useful in the lesson. Now, while I love the resources and tools for teachers for reviewing content and reteaching essential skills, Tools for Teachers is also great just for supplementing classroom instruction by reinforcing best practices and lessons that provide, well, I would describe them as engaging, rigorous, purposeful learning experiences woven together through the formative assessment paradigm. You can see some of these practices listed there, highlighting accessibility strategies, habits of mind and modeling, mentor texts. They offer practice and suggestions for further intervention. The lessons always reference the essential standards, which is a nice way to keep us as teachers focused on what the essential learning is. And then lastly, I would just say that the lessons use academic vocabulary, which is so essential in developing those habits of minds that we see in a discipline. In English, we want our students to have some facility and mastery to use the language of critical reading and writing and language in English language arts, and tapping into that academic vocabulary helps us do that. So anyway, there's a few ways that I've used Tools for Teachers in the classroom, and so much and so more I could say about it, but thank you for taking the time and allowing me to share. So I will turn it back to Tammy. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to all of our wonderful presenters today. Before I give you a little more information about Tools for Teachers and go over some questions and give you some answers, I'd like to let you know about some future webinars in this series, the Tools for Teachers Shared Practice webinars. All of these webinars are collaborations with staff from California schools and districts, and we're really excited to work with people who are using these tools and are talking about their experiences so that we can all benefit. We encourage you to share these upcoming webinars with your colleagues who may be interested in attending. And you can find these trainings on CAASPP.org and ELPAC.org under the trainings tab. They all have separate registration. So the next one is on November 15th. We have a webinar we are planning about boosting instruction with formative assessment and accessibility strategies. I know Brenda was showing those embedded within the instructional resources. And in 2023, we'll continue the series in February. On February 21st, we'll have a webinar supporting student success with interim assessments and tools for teachers. Michael was talking about those connections playlists that are groups of lesson plans that are tied to interim assessment blocks. So that webinar will talk about using the interim assessments that are available through the state with the tools for teachers resources, how they link together to help teachers. We hope that you will join us for these upcoming webinars and share this with your colleagues. So with that, we will go to the Q&A. I'll start with telling you a little bit more about these resources and how they are set up in tools for teachers. All of the instructional resources and tools for teachers are written at grade level with the universal design for learning in mind. Each resource has a formative assessment focus with embedded strategies for differentiating instruction to meet diverse student needs. There are ideas for checking in with students to see where they're at, and there's always ideas for creating accessibility strategies for making sure that students are understanding the tasks at hand. There's also things to consider section where the author of the resource gives teachers ideas for considering multiple needs and you know, things like expanding the resource or supporting all different learners. And then there's suggestions for intervention inside the connections playlist. So all of these resources are designed for a teacher thinking about all of their students and attempting to meet all of, you know, their needs. And so we try we have a very deliberate quality control criteria that we go through in making these resources. So they are embedded with these strategies. They are founded in the standards that students need to know and provide teachers with really quality resources. So we have questions that came up about English language learners, and these resources are not a curriculum they're not an ELD curriculum. They are a supplemental tool for teachers to use. We assume that the teachers are going to adapt these lessons and use them for their learners in the way that best meets what they believe their students need. And so it's not an actual full curriculum. It's a supplemental resource that teachers can use in their instructional practice. So that may help you. There are some authors that have created resources that have specifically said, for your EL learners, try this, or you might find that in some of the resources. But as I mentioned before, the whole setup is in trying to provide teachers with thinking of all their students.
If I could add, Tammy, I was just gonna to add on that. So in tools for teachers, you will explicitly go in looking for the guiding standards, like what is it that you want the students to be able to know and do. But like Tammy mentioned, the criteria that's required to create the lessons, we're constantly focused on not only, you know, how do we differentiate resources for kids at various levels, but what are the scaffolding, what are the structures and strategies that can be there to support English learners. So if you're focused on the skills, lessons will provide strategies for how to help those language learners, you know, be able to access the standards. But the focus is on the standards. Lots of great strategies for how to help them access the skills as well.
And I also want to point out that the accessibility strategies are not, a lot of people see accessibility and they think of special ed students. The accessibility strategies are providing access for students that have needs within the outside of the grade level, curriculum. It's considering all, diverse needs. So often English learners really benefit from those accessibility strategies. For instance, one of the accessibility strategies is an English language dictionary and providing, I think there's another one on providing visual supports. Things like this are within the ELD standards. I also mentioned in an answer to another question that we had a specific webinar last year in our Tools for Teachers webinar series. If you go to CAASPP.org and go to the training tab and you look at past training opportunities and materials, look in September and you will see supporting English learners with the Tools for Teachers website. And that is there's a recording there and the resources there. You can watch that webinar and get some ideas about we presented with some teachers and a colleague from someone who works with ELPAC. And so we have some great ideas about how Tools for Teachers supports English learners. So that's something you might want to check out. I see a question about if materials are written at grade level, the grade level reading level, how can special education students have the same content with a simplified reading level? So obviously, as I just mentioned, it's written at grade level, and then we're providing supports through the embedded strategies and sections of things to consider, instructional supports, ideas for intervention, and we cover it as much as we can. And obviously, a teacher is going to know their students the most and their needs the most. So, for instance, we just really want to emphasize that teachers can they can go into Tools for Teachers, find an idea for a lesson, see the recommended strategies embedded, and then they're going to adapt it for their needs, for their students' needs. So if you have a student who, for instance, is several years, extremely in need of extensive support, that teacher is going to know that, and that teacher is going to be able to adapt use the ideas that are embedded in the lesson and be able to do that. So hopefully that answers your question. Someone asked to complete where, and I'm not sure what that means, complete where. Can you repeat where? We're talking about Tools for Teachers, and it is the links are in the resource guide, which has been posted in the chat. And so if you want to provide more details about that question, I'll be certainly happy to answer that. There's questions about logins. Brenda, someone was asking about your resource and the links to the Tools for Teachers instructional resources, and wanted to know if they need to log in, if they can click on your links and just go straight to the lesson plan, or do they need to log in?
So absolutely, you can click on the link and it will take you straight to the lesson plan, but it's not going to give you the full resource until you actually create that account and are logged into Tools for Teachers. So if you want to have that full access to all of the materials within the lesson and not just a little introductory snapshot, you'll need to create that account and log in.
I saw a couple questions about the recording of this webinar today. We go through an accessibility review, making sure that the closed captions are accurate, and then we will, in a few weeks, we will post it again on the CAASPP.org and ELPAC.org training tab that is along the top of those websites. You'll see training, and there's a drop down where you can select past training opportunities and materials. select this month, September 2022, and you'll see the webinar listed and all the materials, and eventually the recording will be posted in a few weeks. Let's see. If you know someone that wants to log into Tools for Teachers and does not have a TOMS account or a registered username and password yet for logging in, there is in the resource guide a link to the how to self-register for Tools for Teachers. If you are part of a California public school and you have a district email that you use, you can use your district email to make an account to register for Tools for Teachers. And the way that Tools for Teachers works is when you first log in, it'll say, the logo will say Smarter Balanced. And so you're not fully logged in. You will be able to browse in there, see there's a few resources that are fully available. However, California is part of an assessment consortium, and part of that membership in the consortium is being able to have access to Tools for Teachers fully. So through that membership, California has, in the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, we get full access. So that is why there's a login. These resources are copyrighted. They're to be used amongst teachers and students. And so that is how, and when we log into the California version of Tools for Teachers, one very exciting thing is that you'll see science resources that have been added. California teachers have written some resources in partnership with SCOE and the CDE. We've created some science resources that teachers have available when they log in using their TOBS login or their self-registration account through their district email. Okay, looking at other questions.
Hey, Tammy, this is Tyler. Can I answer a question?
Sure.
I saw someone ask about how long does it take to receive the password reset email? So if they already have a TOMS account or a single sign-in account, even if it's just for Tools for Teachers, if you had that already and you don't know your password and need to reset it or whatever that may be, it can take a little while sometimes. And I actually have a tip. If you're not receiving that password reset email. So when you go to the logon screen, you see like the place to put your username and password, and then there's a link that says forgot your password. But below that, where it says first time user, and it says if you have not received your activation email or if your link has expired, you can request a new link, and there's a link that says request one now. That is actually, sometimes that works way faster if you're not getting that password reset, if you just clicked forgot your password. So if you're in that camp, if you're not getting that email, try the request one now link on the login page, and that might come quicker.
Thank you, Tyler. I see a question that says, just to clarify, parents, or if you're a homeschooling parent, cannot create accounts, correct? Only teachers. That is correct. You need to have a district email in order to self-register, because the system recognizes people from districts, from California districts. So if you are a homeschool parent who is linked to a district, you can contact someone from the district to help you find resources to use with students. We do have some people that are asking for proof of attendance. That is something that if you give us your email, that can be sent to you for attending today's webinar. And thank you for being here today. We appreciate that. Okay, looking at these other ones. So in Brenda's presentation, she talked about sample items. Tools for Teachers is under a login, as we've talked about, but the sample items are available to, we just talked about a homeschooling parent. Those sample items are available publicly, and you're able to log into that, the sample items, and use those without a login. So that's something that is a resource to anyone. It's a public site. And don't forget that Beth talked about the professional learning resources within Tools for Teachers. There are professional learning resources that can be used. A facilitator can lead them, so it can be used by district personnel to lead a professional learning community, or even to be put into a training module like Moodle, or I think Beth was talking about Nearpod, or the professional learning resources can also be used individually by teachers who are interested in learning more about Smarter Balanced resources. There's a variety of new resources. In fact, there was a new set that just arrived in Tools for Teachers about communicating about assessment data with parents and families, and establishing that connection and being able to share results, and how to you know, just advice for how to do that. There's some great professional learning resources in there, so don't forget about that. Let me check the questions again. So I'll ask our presenters, is there anything crossing your mind that you would like to add before we wrap up our webinar?
I think I would, sorry, I apologize, Beth.
That's okay, Michael.
I was just going to say, I responded to somebody in the chat because they were asking about, again, I think they were talking about grade level passages, and you know, if you had students that were like special education students, and if and so for the benefit of everyone, the one thing that I might say is that you know, the focus with at least many of the lessons, and the way I perceive them, is targeted intervention around specific discrete skills. So if you have a student who might be reading at any grade level, if they're not understanding the skill, although you can focus with grade level text, a lot of the resources, again, provide scaffolding, you know, as in differentiated text, or maybe modified passages at different levels, so that all students can at least practice the skill and make sure they understand the skill or standard. And then, of course, you try to, once they know what they're doing, the process that they're doing to attack the skill or the reading strategy, whatever you're looking at, the standard, then of course you apply that to your grade level text. So I just wanted to add that for the benefit of anybody who might be wondering.
Thank you. And Beth, were you going to add something? Was it your voice I heard?
Oh yeah, you know, I was just going to say, get logged in there and kind of poke around, and just in general, I think if you go in there looking for something specific, there's a lot of pressure. So if you're just going to go in and look and see what's available, you're going to stumble on something that's amazing. And then maybe more than one something that's amazing, and start bookmarking items that you can go back to and really look at in detail.
And again, I would just say exactly, that's, you know, when you, I found that I'm talking specifically resources on lessons. I can go into any lesson and look at the strategies and how lessons are done. And it provides a great amount of inspiration about all of these best practices and how we can just adapt to what we're doing in the classroom. So there you have it.
Thank you. And I'd also like to point out, when Michael was talking about how you can drill down, you can use the filters, you can filter by keyword from a content standard, or you can go into the filters. You can filter by grade level, subject area. You can filter by content standard. It drills down, and you can really get into where a specific skill that you're working on, and as he just said. So it's very nice, and you know it's grounded in the standards, and it's high quality instructional materials that you can depend on in providing a rigorous curriculum that will not waste your time as a teacher, and it will actually save you time in finding something that is high quality. So with that, I'd like to turn it back to Amy as we wrap up our webinar today. Thank you very much. I'm going to scroll through these questions really quick. Do you have information on how to access the IAB interim assessments? And so I'll just really quickly go over that. So the interim assessments that are available through the state are the Smarter Balanced interim assessments, and there's 3 types. There's a comprehensive assessment, and then there's the IABs, and then there's focused IABs. And the really popular ones are the focused IABs, which is a type of IAB, about 15, 18 questions, and they focus on particular groups of standards, and these have lesson plans and tools for teachers that are tied to that, and they're in Connections playlists. And so when you go into Tools for Teachers and you search for Connections playlists, you can use the link. There's a link in, when you're looking at a Connections playlist, there's a link that says, take a look at this IAB, and you can see the questions for the IAB. And so there's links to the interim assessments within Tools for Teachers. There's information about interim assessments inside that Connections playlist. When we scroll down, it says more information about the IAB background, and there's links to finding more. So that this particular webinar does not focus on the IABs, but I encourage you to attend in February, where we do have teachers from districts that will be talking about how they use IABs and the Tools for Teachers resources in their classrooms and in their districts. So that's something that's on the rise. We have many, many districts that are starting to really use those interim assessments linked to Tools for Teachers resources to help provide teachers, saves them time and helps to focus in on the skills that students need to know and be able to do in order to meet grade level standards. So that is IABs in a nutshell. And we hope that you investigate Tools for Teachers for that. Now, administering IABs is also something that is a secure item, those interim assessments, so that is linked to a login. That is something that, looking at those IAB questions, that is something that is meant to be between public school teachers and their students. So just to give you a heads up on that. So, all right, I'll turn it back over to Amy. Thank you, Amy. And thank you, presenters.
Yes, I was just going to say that. Thank you to all of our wonderful presenters, and thank you all in the audience who gave us some great questions today that we could discuss. So that brings us to the end of our meeting. We hope that you got some great ideas and tips today. If you have any remaining questions about Tools for Teachers, feel free to reach out to us at caaspp@cde.ca.gov. We hope that we see you at the next webinar. Have a wonderful day. Bye, everyone.